Hello everyone, good evening. Sharing my screen. Before others dial in, let's get connected to the OIC instance, guys. So we've started off with our first integration in OIC with the REST API that we've started off with. I have picked up a project that we were working on. This is a project that we created, that we have created in our previous session, and we created a REST trigger connection. And with that connection, we have started off with a REST API. Okay, let's get into it now. And in this integration, we need to get started with configuring a trigger connection. We need to get started with configuring a trigger connection first. And at the moment you create an integration, this is what you get to see. First of all, a blank screen, and there would be a start and an end node in it. And you would see few options at the top here. So the first thing is the layout would be vertical, and you need to click on a start icon here. You need to click on a start icon here and then configure a trigger connection. Okay, and you do have an option to change the layout if you want. You do have an option to change the layout if you want. It looks like the plus icon. Yeah, click on a plus icon. And we would use this REST trigger connection to start the integration. Now, what is the expectation, guys, for this REST API? Let me open the PPT. And all this REST API should do is, it should take in first name as input, and it needs to prefix hello and send that back as a response. Okay, the REST API should take first name as input, prefix hello, and send it back as a response. So what is it that you want to call the endpoint as, guys? So to whatever first name you pass as input to this, it is going to prefix hello, right? So I'm going to call it as say hello. Just give it a meaningful name. And when you name it, use a small letter for the first word and a capital letter from the next word onwards, and there should not be any spaces. And for this REST API, we want to expose only one endpoint or only one resource. Remember, guys, when you when you look at the documentation, if you go to any REST APIs given by Oracle, the moment you pick up a resource, how many endpoints do you see in a specific resource? Guys, say for example, if I pick up banks, how many endpoints do you see? 5 endpoints, right? And these endpoints would help you to perform CRUD operations. You have one endpoint to create, update, delete, and you have 2 read endpoints. So in a similar fashion, when you create a REST API in OIC, you can expose multiple resources or verbs or multiple endpoints like this if you want. Okay, but since it is a Hello World REST API, I just want to expose only one get endpoint as part of this integration. And when we do other integrations, say for example, when we do the AP invoice REST API, when we do the AP invoice REST API, I think I've not done it for this branch yet. So if you go to UG61, when we go to AP invoice REST API, I would show you when we create this AP invoice REST API, I'm going to show you how to create a REST API with 2 branches. Remember in this, when we create this REST API, I'll show you how to expose multiple resources or verbs from a single REST API. We'll expose one branch which would help us create AP invoice. We'll expose another branch which would help us get AP invoice details based on invoice ID. Okay, so when we build this API, we would understand how to configure multiple resources. But for this one, yes, I just want to expose one endpoint, so I'm not going to tick this. Continue. And what this operation is going to do, guys? It takes first name as input, prefix hello, and send it back as a response. Now, I need to mention what is a relative resource URI. Okay, meaning I need to mention a path here. So as a path, I can mention say hello here / say hello. And into this REST API, do we need to receive any inputs, guys, into the REST API?
Yes.
We need to receive first name as input, right? And what are the two ways to receive inputs into REST API, guys? We discussed it when we did the REST APIs, right?
One as URL parameter.
One is the template parameter or URI parameter like this, right? Meaning within
Yeah,
the
and
URI
yeah.
itself, I can mention a / and I can put a parameter in curly braces. And since it is first name, I would change it to first name. So this is one way to receive input parameter into REST API. You can configure it as a template or a URI parameter. And how do you mention it? How do you configure it? You put it within the curly braces. What if I want to receive two input parameters, guys, the last name as well? What do I need to do? I just have to repeat it. Okay. Now, the moment you put in a first name and last name as template parameters here, if you put two parameters in curly braces here, you would notice that OIC would want you to review the parameters. Remember, guys, in a REST API, we are trying to create our own REST API here. And on a REST API, what are the two important options that you see, guys? You see a HTTP method, and you also see a relative path. So these are the two important options that you mention on an endpoint. So for this endpoint, I would want to mention it as get. I want to use a get method because when client hits the REST API, they're going to pass in first name as input, and they want to get back hello plus that first name in the response. So they pass in first name and they want to get back a response. So that is why we need to use a method as get, but we do have other methods as well. So when we build AP invoice REST API, I'll show you how to use a post method as well. So I'm exposing this method as a get, and this is a relative path that I'm mentioning here. Now, when I activate this REST API, there would be a long endpoint URL that would be generated. There would be an endpoint URL that gets generated. And in that endpoint URL, you have OIC instance link, the integration identifier. And at the end of that endpoint URL, you will see this path. At the end of the endpoint URL, you will see this path. Now, yes, I select the method as get here. For get endpoints, can we pass in request payload, guys? Do we normally pass in request payloads for get endpoint? We only pass in parameters as input, right? Only if it is a create or update endpoints, we normally pass in a request payload. Because here you're creating something and here you're trying to update it. So only in the case of create and update, we need to pass in request payloads. In the case of get endpoints, it is not allowed. So that is why if you see the moment I select it as get, it is not letting me configure a request payload because for get endpoints, you cannot configure it. And if I change it to post, put or patch, okay, you would see that it gets enabled. Okay, and how about the first parameter? You could see that the first parameter checkbox is ticked. And it says add and review parameters. Right now, why is this checked? Because we mentioned in the path, we mentioned two template parameters, right? So when I go to the next screen, OIC wants me to review those two template parameters. That is why it is checked by default. So if I take this off, you see, you can uncheck this because there are no parameters created. So you will not be forced to do it. But the moment I put it in, you would be forced to review the parameters. And yes, when client hits this REST API, they want to get back a response. So I'm going to tick this box which says configure this endpoint to receive the response. So if you want to receive two inputs like first name and last name, this is how you're going to configure it. And you click on continue. And you see the path here, resource URI path, method. And if you scroll down, you see template parameters here. And how many parameters do you see here, guys? 2 parameters, right? You see 2 parameters here, first name and last name, first name and last name. So whatever you put in curly braces in the path, those 2 parameters would be showing up here, first name and last name. What is the data type that is assigned? String data type. If you click on the drop down, you can change the other data type if you want. Okay, change it to other data type if you want. And what else do we need to do? So whatever you mention in curly braces in the path would be created as template parameters by default. And the moment I activate this REST API, within the endpoint URL itself, or within the URL that gets generated for this API itself, you would be able to see this path. You would be able to see that path. And how is that path going to look like? Let me just show you how the endpoint URL is going to look like. The endpoint URL is going to look something like this, if it's a template parameter. The endpoint URL would look something like this. You would have OIC instance link, 443 would be the port number, and then you have this suffix, which would be common for all the REST APIs. So whatever is the highlighted part, right? Whatever URL that I have highlighted here, so that URL is going to get prefixed to all the integrations that we're going to all the REST APIs that we activate in the OIC instance. And you would be able to see the REST API name, sorry, the identifier here. You see the version number, and at the end of it, you see, say hello, first name and last name. So whatever is the path that I'm going to mention here, this is going to show up at the end of the endpoint URL. And when you test the REST API in a Postman, what is it that we need to pass, guys? Apart from first name and last name, we would be passing in place of first name and last name, you would pass in the actual parameters. So instead of first name and last name, you pass it as John Doe. Meaning in place of that template parameter, you pass in the actual value. Remember, guys, don't put in curly braces. I see some people doing this. Don't put it in curly braces, guys. Take out the curly braces and just pass in the values. This is how the template parameters work. And when do you use template parameters, guys? To be frank, template parameters need to be used when the input that you receive should be used or would help you to identify an exact record in a database. So since it is hello world, right, it would be very difficult to explain a template or query with the help of this example. But if you're probably building a bank's REST API, and if you want to receive an input, and with that input, if you want to receive, or if that input is going to help you identify an exact bank in the DB, then you receive it as a template parameter like bank party ID. Okay, and it's nothing but a primary key. And what is another way to receive parameters, guys, into REST API? Query parameters. And how do you add them? Query parameters, remember, if you see the template parameters, do you see add or remove option here, guys?
No.
Do you see to add or remove? So which means they get automatically created based on what you mention in the URI. So if I go back and if I take off last name, how many template parameters would be created now, guys?
One,
right? So if I click on continue, I see only one template parameter of data type string. And if I mention 3, you see 3 parameters created and you can change the data type. Whereas the query parameters need to be defined explicitly. Click on add. And I'm going to say f name of data type string. And I can add another parameter. I can say l name of data type string. So if it is a query parameter, you're not going to mention it in the URI or a path. Instead, you need to define them explicitly like this, and you need to assign a data type. To it. And what does it mean, guys? Say, for example, if you are not receiving it as a template parameter. Okay, and if you're not receiving it as template parameter, in the URI, it is going to be just say hello. And you don't see any template parameters here. You don't see that section at all. and I can define query parameters explicitly. Now, when I define query parameters here, when I define query parameters like this, say for example, I've built a REST API with 2 query parameters, no template parameters, no URI parameters. How would the URL would look like, guys? In the URL, you would only have / I'll say hello. You will not see the query parameters in the URI. Instead, how do you need to pass in the query parameters? You need to put a question mark at the end. You, in the sense, client needs to put a question mark at the end. And you say question mark Q equal to first name, which is a query parameter name equal to Sachin, and the second query parameter name equal to Tendulkar. So if it is a template or URI parameter, you see them in the URL and you pass in the values. If it is a query parameter, you don't see anything in the URL. You don't see anything in the URL. Instead, when the query parameters are defined here, we would be able to see those query parameters here. You say question mark Q equal to, and you see F name equal to the value and the second query parameter, and you pass in the value there. So this is the difference between template and query parameters. Now, when to use what, guys? For an example like hello world, it's okay. You can either use template or query, it doesn't really matter. But if you're probably building, say, something like AP invoice REST API or AR invoice REST API or something, say, for example, if you have to receive an input, maybe something like an invoice ID, which would help you to identify one invoice, which type of parameter I need to use, guys? In such case, I have to go for template parameter. And maybe let's say, for example, I need to receive something like a business unit as input. And based on the business unit, I need to get the invoices in that BU. So for that, in a BU, I could have multiple invoices, right? So in such cases, you can go in for query parameters. So ask yourself one single question. Whatever input that we are going to receive into the REST API, should that help us identify one record or multiple rows? If it is one, you use template, otherwise you go for query. And I'm going to make use of template parameters for this one. And I would just say first name. And I'm not going to define any query parameters. And I need to enter a sample response payload here. I need to enter a sample response payload. So where do I get it from? I can change this to JSON sample because REST APIs use JSON format for communication, right? So I can change it to JSON sample. And here I can either upload a sample file or I can enter a sample JSON inline here. So I click on inline here. And where do I get the sample JSON payload from? I can go in here, copy this sample JSON payload. In the response, what is it that we want to send back in the REST API, guys? We just want to send back one attribute. Called greeting. And to that attribute, I'm also assigning, say, hello, John, or instead of John, you could even say ABC as well. So the value that you assign here, the sample value that you mentioned here, it doesn't really matter. So this would be used only to determine what data type is appropriate for greeting. This value is used to determine what data type is appropriate for greeting. Okay, so if you want to receive 2 attributes in the response, how do you mention it, guys? You mention it this way. Okay, so depending on what exactly you want to receive back in the response, you need to enter a sample request payload here. Sample response payload. Click on continue. And you would be able to see the endpoint summary here. It's a get method, you see a path, and you see that it is a JSON response. Click on finish. The moment you configure a response in a trigger, remember in the trigger I said we want to receive a response, and I said I've also entered a sample response payload, right? The moment you enter a sample response payload in the trigger, OIC will try to help you a bit here, and it would say, Prasad, since you said you want to send back a response, I would add a response element automatically, and it would also add the mapper element as well. Okay, because when you want to send back a response, of course, you would want to assign value to greeting, right? You don't want to send back a blank greeting. So you want to assign a value to it. So that's why the mapper element also gets generated automatically. So when you look at the layout here, you see this is the one that we are using. It's a vertical layout. You can change it to horizontal as well if you want. Or you can also use the vertical with the details. So this is what we call as outline. Outline means it will tell you what connection you are using, or what is the name that we have used, and what is the connection that we have used, and what is the adapter type. So you basically see the details for every node. So what's the difference between these two? Both are vertical. So this is vertical without details, and this is outline means a vertical layout with the details. And horizontal means you see this outline. You can pick and choose which one you want to go for. Now, and if you look at this one, this is what we call as a mapper element. Okay, this is what we call as a mapper element or a transformation element. And you see the dotted line around it, guys. The dotted line indicates that mappings are not done. Dotted line indicates that mappings are not done. Now to do the mappings, I need to double click on it. And when I double click on it, what do I get to see, guys? First of all, you see a source and you see a target. There are a lot of things that you get to see in here, guys. Focus only on the bits that I am explaining. I would explain each and every option that you see here. Okay, focus on the things that I'm explaining. Don't keep looking around at the options that you see on screen. On the target side, first of all, what is it that you are seeing in the target, guys? You see that there is a greeting that you want to send back. And on the source side, remember this is a get endpoint, and we configured a first name as a template parameter. We configured first name as a template parameter. Okay, so if you look at the source, we are receiving first name, and if you look at the response, we are sending back greeting. Where did this come from, guys? It came from a sample response payload. What did we enter as a sample response payload, guys? This is what I entered. And where did this come from, guys? This is what we entered as a template parameter. Okay. Now, if I click on this greeting element, nothing happens. Anything happening on screen, guys? Nothing, right? If I click on it, nothing happens. Now, if I want to map first name to greeting, pick this one up, and I'm going to drop it on the greeting like this. The moment you assign a source attribute to a target, what is going to happen, guys? There would be a target node that gets created on the greeting first. There would be a node that gets created, and to that node, and that node opens up at the bottom here. And first name gets assigned to the greeting attribute. And you see the box here, it opened up immediately. So the moment you map a source to a target, an expression or a node got created on the target attribute, and you see the box opening up, and the box is in view only mode. Okay, why is it in view only mode? Because you've just done the mapping. Now to edit this, what do I need to do? I need to click on this one to go into developer view. We are in a design view at the moment, and if I click on this one, it would take me to a developer view. Now when I go into developer view, the moment I click on developer view, you see immediately 3 options are coming in here. Now what's the first thing that you see, guys? You see that the box is in expression mode. The box is in expression mode, meaning whatever attribute that you would have here, whatever expression you see here, that expression would be evaluated. And the result of that expression would be assigned to greeting attribute. Now, what is the part that you see, guys? So execute template parameter first name. So whatever is the first name that I'm going to receive as input into my REST API, that first name is getting assigned to the greeting attribute. Right? So that is what we are doing here. So if I activate this REST API, if I leave this mapping as is, if I activate this REST API, and if I test it by passing in John as input, what would we get back as greeting, guys?
Same John.
Same John only.
Same John, right? Because we are not prefixing any hello. Okay. But what was the requirement? We thought that we would do a bit of a transformation, right? So we thought we would prefix hello to the first name and send that back as a response. So I wanted to prefix hello, or I want to concatenate hello to the first name here. How do I do it? If you click on the menu option here, toggle functions, you see the functions here. You see a long list of functions. Again, these functions are grouped into categories like string function, date function, integration cloud function, etc. As we progress in the course, we will be seeing functions from other categories as well. But in this one, I just need a string function. What function do I need in string, guys? Concat function, because I need to concatenate two strings. So I'm going to drop this in here, drop in the function, concat function. Now the concat function would take in two parameters. So the second parameter, I'll put it as first name. And in the first parameter, I would say hello space. In the first parameter, I would say hello space, concat hello space. That would be the first parameter, and this would be the second parameter. And to save this, whatever changes you make in the expression, guys, don't just click on into mark and don't assume that it is saved, guys. So I clicked on that into mark, right? So do you think that mapping is saved, guys?
No.
It is not saved, it is lost. So if you make some changes in the expression here, ensure that you hit the save button. Only when you hit the save button, it gets saved. Okay, that is one important point. And if you look at this box, there's also one more option that you see here. You have an option to assign a literal value. Sometimes what would happen? Yes, in most cases, you will assign attribute from source to the target. That is what we normally do, right? Whatever attributes we receive, whatever payload we receive as input into the integration, we pass it as input to the other services. But in some cases, we might want to assign a literal value to the target attributes. It could be a text or it could be a number, but it is a static value that you assign. In such case, how do you do it, guys? So let's see how we do it. If you erase it, the mapping gets wiped out. And if you save it, the mapping is saved. I mean, the wiped out mapping. Now the box is in expression mode, right? So if I want to assign a static or a literal value to greeting, if I want to assign static or a literal value to the greeting, what is it that I need to do? I need to click on text here. And the moment I click on text, what is going to happen, guys? You would notice that at you see the first word here, guys. You see a change in it. What is it changed to now?
Literal value.
It is saying literal value. So the moment you click on this one, the box would change from expression to literal value. When I click on it one more time, it is in expression mode. Now if I want to assign a literal value to it, I can click on text and it gets into a literal mode, which means I can assign any static value or any number to it. So if I want to assign a literal value to an attribute, could be a static string or a number. In such cases, I can go into a text mode, so that you see a literal value here at the top, and you can assign a value to it. But if I do it this way, what would happen, guys? If I save this one, what would happen? It doesn't really matter what first name you receive. We are not even considering it. Always we're going to send back hello world in the response. Yes or no, guys?
Yes.
But this is not what we wanted, right? So if you want to assign some static string to a target attribute, this is how you do it. But this is not what I want. This is not what I want. And I'm back in the expression mode here. Sorry, I'm back in the expression mode here. I'm going to write that expression here. I think I've lost that expression. Concat hello space, comma, and you can drop in that first name. And I would save this. Now, there are other options that you get to see in this screen. There are other options that you get to see in this screen. We will worry about them in tomorrow's session. In tomorrow's session, I'll also open up the mapper again, and I will start talking about the mapping options one by one. For now, I'm going to just click on validate here. I'm going to just click on validate. It says it is successfully validated. I go back. And do you see a dotted line now, guys? Do you see a dotted line now? No, right?
No.
It is a proper node. It is a proper node now, which means the mappings are done. And I can save the integration. Now, when you save the integration, remember I'm done with the integration. Well, now I need to test this first and I need to share it with the client. But to test this integration, what do I need to do? I need to activate it. And to activate it, so this integration is in draft status, right? Let's see if we get an option to activate it. We go back and we see that the integration is in draft status. Click on the menu option. Do you guys see an option to activate it, guys?
No.
We don't see it, right? Now, the reason is when you build the integration, it would be in, when you build the integration, it would be in draft status. Now we need to change the integration status from draft to configured. We need to change the integration status from draft to configured. And how do we change the status, guys, from draft to configured? By enabling tracking. By enabling tracking. So on an integration, we need to enable tracking identifiers. And once you enable tracking on an integration, the status of the integration changes from draft to configured. And once the integration status changes to configured, we can go ahead and activate the integration. Now, how do we enable tracking, guys? Get into the integration and you need to click on this eye icon here. You see the business identifiers, click on that eye icon. And that would give you an option to select the business identifiers as tracking fields. First of all, on an integration, you can enable up to 3 tracking identifiers. The first one is mandatory, but not the others. You need to have at least 1 tracking identifier for an integration, and you can have up to 3. Now, where exactly these tracking identifiers would come into picture, guys? After you activate this integration, you would share the URL with a client. Client is going to trigger it 100 times or 500 times. And when they trigger it, they might pass in different first names, right? So they might trigger it with John, James, or Steve, etc. And later on, client wants to search for a request of this REST API that he has created or that he has triggered, passing in James as input. So first of all, where can they see the request, guys? In OIC instance, where do we need to go to see the request triggered? So within the main navigation option, you have something called as observability, right? So I can go in here to see the requests that are triggered. I can click on observability. And when I click on observability, what are the options that you get to see?
Instances.
You see plenty of options. And if I go into instances, what is it that I get to see? I would be able to see all the integration instances which are created in the last 1 hour by default. And if I change the filter, say for example, I change it to last 32 days, I see 2000 instances. Now client has triggered this REST API 100 times. And apart from these integrations, apart from those 100 instances of this integration, there are almost like 2000 instances here. Now, if I'm a client and if I want to search for the integration, the Hello World REST API that is triggered with a first name as James, if I have all the time on earth, what I can do, guys, I can keep scrolling down and I can search for the integration instance. Yes or no, guys? but that is not likely to be the case, right? We have plenty of other things to do. So how do you search for your requests? How do you track your requests? That is where the tracking identifiers would come in. So when you activate an integration, you would be enabling tracking identifiers, and those identifiers are going to help you to track the instances of this REST API. So what it means is if I select first name as a tracking identifier, a first tracking identifier, and if I activate this REST API, if this REST API is triggered 100 times with the different first names, when I want to search for the instances, I can directly come in here and I can type in the first name with which I triggered the integration. You see, the moment I type in John, you see there was, this is a REST API created for a previous batch. And this REST API was triggered with first name is equal to John. So this tracking identifier, so you can search for your requests or you can track the instances by entering full or partial, primary or secondary identifiers. Remember, you can have up to 3 identifiers, right? You can either search for the instances by using a primary or secondary identifiers. And remember, guys, you don't even have to type in the full value. Even if I say John, it would show up. Even if I say Joe, it would show up. Okay. Even if I say Joe, okay, why is it not showing up? Okay, I'm not really sure what has happened here, but you can search for the integration by entering even the partial value as well, guys. It need not be a full value. It need not be a full value. But yes, this is where the tracking identifiers would help us. So I'm selecting the first name as a tracking identifier and save the integration. Now that the tracking identifiers are selected for this integration, the status changed from draft to configured. So which means, will I be able to see an option to activate the integration now, guys? I see it is in configured state, and I can go ahead and activate it now. And what did we do to change the status from draft to configured? We have enabled tracking. Now, the moment you activate it, what's going to happen, guys? The moment you activate an integration, you get to see a bunch of options. We'll be talking about them in detail later on. Not with the Hello World service. Once we build, say, journal import service, I'm going to talk about, or maybe the file transfer service, I will be talking about the tracing level in detail. Because when you look at the activity stream that is generated, it will be easy for me to explain these options. So for now, just select a debug as an option here. And don't think that I'm skipping a topic here. I will be talking about this in detail after we build the file transfer service, because in file transfer service, we would have the loops and we have the required components in it, which would help me to explain this concept easily. For now, I'm just activating an integration, setting a debug as ticking the debug option or setting the tracing level as debug, and I would go ahead and activate it. The moment you activate an integration, what is it that you get to see, guys? You see the state change to active. Now I can click on the menu option here and I can click on run here. Now, when you click on run here, what do you see, guys? You see that there is an option to see the endpoint metadata here. So when you click on endpoint metadata, what is it that you get to see, guys? You get to see the URL that is created. So this is the endpoint URL generated for our integration. And you see this endpoint URL, guys? Is there a format to this? So if you look at this endpoint URL, what do you see in here, guys? You see the OIC instance link. And after OIC instance link, you see IC API integration V2 flows REST project UG63. So until this point, the OIC instance link until REST, this would be something that gets prefixed to every REST API that you activate in this OIC instance. And after that, you see project keyword, the project name. And this is an integration identifier or a short name. And this is a version number. And say hello, and the first name is what you entered in a relative path. Say hello and first name is what you entered in a relative path. Okay, first name is a template parameter, right? Now, can I just tell me one thing, guys? Can I just assume that this integration is going to work as expected? And can I share this endpoint URL with a third party, guys, or a client? Or do we need to do the unit testing?
We need to do it.
We certainly need to do the unit testing, guys. Any integration, big or small, you need to test it. Only then you can be sure that it works as expected. And how do I do a unit testing, guys? Since it is a REST API, I have an option to unit test the integration from within OIC instance, guys. Remember, you don't see this option. You don't get this option for SOAP services. For SOAP services, we still have to rely on testing tools like SOAP UI to test it. But in the case of REST APIs, we do have an option to test it from within OIC instance itself. Now, what is it prompting me to enter, guys, here? First name.
First,
Okay. So if we pass in the first name as geeks here, what is the output that we should get back, guys? If the integration works as expected, let's run it and see. The moment I run the integration, what is it that you get to see, guys? Immediately you would get to see the greeting here. You get to see the greeting, and what is the response that you get back? You've got back a response where you have greeting, and do you see hello ABC here, guys, or hello geeks? Hello geeks, right? It is not the sample request payload that is coming in here. To the first name, hello, to the first name that you pass in, hello is prefixed, and that expression is assigned to the greeting attribute. And what else do you see, guys? You also see that there is an instance ID created for this invocation. Remember, we triggered this REST API, right? There is a unique instance ID generated for it. And since I have set the tracing level to debug, whatever happens within the integration, whatever steps happen within the integration, each and every step will be captured in detail here. Whatever integration activity happens, all the nodes in the integration, all the activities within the integration would be captured in the activity stream. And since I have set the tracing level to debug, what else do you see, guys? At each and every node in the integration, you have an option to view the payload. So if I click on this one, I get to see. If I click on this one, yeah, let me maximize it. If I click on this payload symbol, I would be able to see. Okay, let me maximize it and then click on this. The moment I click on this, it would be showing me what is the payload that I received as input into the integration. What is the first name that I received, guys? geeks. I have an option to copy it, or I have an option to download it as well. And this payload went through the mapper, and the data mapping is complete. And after the data mapping is complete, what is assigned to the greeting, guys? After the mapping is complete, hello space geeks, right? And what is the message that has been sent as output? If you click on the payload here, you see this message has been sent back. Now the benefit of using, so if you set the tracing level to debug, first of all the integration activity will be captured in activity stream. And in addition to the integration activity, at each and every step, you also see the payloads captured. At each and every step, you also see the payloads captured. Remember, guys, this is like a lifesaver for us, guys, tracing level debug. Because when we build complex integrations, in dev, SIT, and UAT, we are going to set the tracing level to debug so that any integration errors out, we can easily go into that particular integration, see what node has errored out, and the most important point is we can see what is the payload passed as input to that error node, and you can easily figure out what is the mapping issue that you have. Now you see this instance ID in the test page here, right? Now I can, if I go back in here, yes, I would lose that instance information. I cannot see it anymore. But where else would this information be available, guys? If you go into observability, if you go into main menu option, observability, instances, what is it that we would be able to see? We should be able to see the instance here. So I'm going to change this back to last 1 hour. And what is it that we get to see? We get to see the instances which are created in the last 1 hour. And yes, I can, if I scroll down, I can see my integration, which is triggered here. But what is easiest way for me to search for my integration instance, guys? For this integration, I've selected first name as a tracking identifier. And I triggered the integration passing in Geeks as a first name. So I can just come in here and I can enter Geeks. So a tracking identifier would help you to search for your requests. And you don't need to enter a full name, guys. Even if you enter it partially, it should ideally work, guys. I'm not really sure why it's not working here. Probably it's a bug for Oracle to fix, because as you can see clearly here, you can enter full or partial primary or secondary identifier. But only if I enter a full value, it's working, guys. If I enter a partial value, it's not working.
Maybe
This was
this
not.
distance retained is there or filter this one.
Okay, it doesn't really matter. Yeah. So even if you take out all the filters, okay, let me take out all the filters.
So, Prasad, I think, see, while you give the tracking, there is some command it is coming there, Prasad, like tracking is equal to first name. Because of that, can you open the OIC and yeah, just go to the tracking place where you have given that tracking one in the integration.
Okay, just one request here, dear. I've been using OIC for 8.5 years now. Okay. In fact, yes, I'm new to Gen 3 and new to Gen 3 in the sense that Gen 3 has been released recently. And when I explain something, I'm quite happy that all of you are trying to correct me or point towards a possible resolution in it. But when I say something, there's a meaning in it. And if I don't know something, I'm more than happy to admit it. First of all, in that screen where you enable a tracking identifier, there's nothing that you choose. Okay, so if you find something, let me know. So here, first of all, in Gen 2, yes, we get to see the same prompt. And if you enter full or partial value, if we say Geeks here, it should, even if you enter a partial value, it should ideally show the value as well. Okay, but that is not the case here. Probably what I could sense is it could be something for Oracle to fix it. But for now, if you type in a tracking identifier full value, you're able to see it here. Okay, and what else do we need to do? What else do we, so this is where a tracking identifier would help to search for your instances. Okay, now how do I open this instance, guys? A common mistake we might do is you click on this link because it looks like a hyperlink, right? It's quite tempting to hit this one. And when you hit this one, what is going to happen, guys? It is going to open the integration. But is this what we wanted?
No.
We don't want to open the integration. Instead, we wanted to see what exactly happened in that request. So to do that, you need to click on first name equal to Geeks. Okay, and when you click on first name equal to Geeks, what is it that you see here? You see the green color highlighting, indicating the flow within the integration. And you see a trigger, integration trigger, and you see a mapper. Yes, we received first name here. We have prefixed hello here, and we have sent that back in the response. And whatever activity stream that you're seeing here, including the payloads, the instance ID, everything is captured here. Everything is there in the observability screen. So how do I see that? I click on activity stream. I see the instance ID here, and I see the entire integration activity. So then, in short, this particular bit is what you're seeing on the test page here. Since we have set the tracing level to debug, we are able to see all this information. Like at what split second integration crossed each node, and how much time it took to process it, and what is the payload at each and every node. Okay, and we created, let's say we tested this integration. It's working as expected. Can I go ahead and send this? Can I go ahead and share this endpoint URL to the client base? Yes. And how do I, and if I share this endpoint URL with the client, what is he going to do? He's going to trigger my integration with the help of this endpoint URL. And what is he going to do? Since we don't have a client to trigger our integration, we will try to mimic it as if client is triggering our integration by using a testing tool. We don't want to trigger it from OIC. We go into Postman tool and we open it up, create a new request and send it out. Now, what is the method that we need to use, guys?
Get method.
Get is a method that we have used, right? So if you click on this endpoint metadata, you see it is a get method that we need to use. So I selected get method here. I've entered the endpoint URL. And what's the first name that we want to use? James. Now, if I fire off this request, would this work, guys?
No.
Authentication error, right? And when we get this authentication error, first of all, we are getting authentication error. So what is it that we know? We know that we have to pass in authorization details. So I go into authorization here. I click on a plus icon on click on the drop down here. And when I click on a drop down here, you see that there are so many formats in here. Now, how do I know in what format I need to pass in authentication details for this integration, guys? Client cannot guess it. We need to tell them explicitly in what format they have to pass in, or they can pass in login credentials. And what are what determines the login format credentials, guys, or login, the format in which you can pass in the credentials? In what format you can pass in credentials when you trigger an integration? What is going to determine that, guys?
The way we configured trigger point.
Access level.
The connection
Yes.
that used.
You go to the integration, and within the integration, you see a trigger connection. In this integration, I used this trigger connection. So the integrations, trigger connections, security policy is going to determine that. Now, what did I select here? By default, it was OAuth, right? Open Authorization Token 2.0. I changed it to OAuth 2.0 or basic auth. Because sometimes what would happen is, remember guys, it might be open authorization OAuth token 2.0. But the other system that a client has, which needs to trigger a REST API, might not have the capability to generate OAuth token and send it in the request. In such case, what we have to do? Remember, not many systems have a capability to generate tokens, guys, especially if a client is using a very old system. They can, but every system has an option to pass in login credentials as a basic auth when you trigger an integration, but not all of them have OAuth token option. So depending on the capabilities that other system that the client users has, we decide which security policy we need to use. But since I said both are supported, I can select basic auth here, and I can enter the OIC instance username and the password here. I'm passing in the OIC instance username and password here because I'm trying to trigger a REST API built and deployed in this OIC instance. Would this work, guys, now? Because it is OAuth or basic auth, it is going to work. Had it been this one, guys, had it been OAuth or 2.0, the default one, if I pass in authentication details like this, would it have worked?
No.
It would not have worked. Okay. So the integrations, trigger connections, security policy is going to determine in what format you pass in authentication details when you trigger a REST API, guys. No shooting in the dark, no inky pinky wonky, guys. I see many people do it. Even experienced folks with 2 to 3 years do this, guys. They try basic auth first. काम नहीं कर रहा हूँ, then try username password token. If that also doesn't work, then they try OAuth token. You need to be really clear on what you're doing, guys. Okay, so you just have to, instead of trying out permutations and combinations, you just go to the integration, trigger connection, security policy, and this will tell you exactly what you need to do. Okay, should it work now?
Yes, it should.
It should, right? And what is it that we have got back? We've got back hello, James. Now tell me one thing, guys. We triggered a REST API here, right? So for this request also, instance would have been created in OIC, guys, or no?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
created.
Instance would have been created, right? So it doesn't really matter where you trigger the integration from, whether it is from OIC instance, you do it as part of unit testing, or whether you do it from Postman tool or from any from any other application. Doesn't matter, guys. To keep it simple, when an integration is triggered in OIC, that is built in this OIC instance, you see an request created. Do I see a request now? Yes, I see first name equal to James. I see first name equal to James. Okay, and it is saying, looks like it is giving you a hint there. It says primary colon. What you see, you read that last line, guys. Use primary colon prefix to search only for a primary identifier. So if you are entering a value, and if you want to use it only, if you want to search it only for primary identifier, I can probably try with this one. And that's going to give you that primary identifier. But even then, and if you just try with capital James, so this could be either a primary identifier or it could be a secondary identifier. But even then also we get it. So this would make, so if you prefix primary, then whatever value that you're going to mention after it would only be searched as a primary identifier. Okay, since you can search with either of them, if you want to search only in the primary, you can prefix it. Okay, so I can see James here, and if I hit this endpoint, so if I open the request, I get to see all the details. Now we have seen how to pass in basic auth, right? So in tomorrow's session, I'll show you, or I'll talk about how you can make use of a open authorization token to trigger your REST API. What is the problem with this one, guys? The problem is I need to share the OIC instance username and password with a third party. And in the endpoint URL, do we see the OIC instance link, guys?
Yes, it is there, sir.
So what if that third party tries to add smart and log into this OIC instance with a username and password? What is the control that we put in?
With security level execution and view only, we have that security.
No, not view.
Observer role.
Service
only
invoker.
Service
Yeah.
invoker.
Absolutely. So when we create this user, and when we grant this user as access to this OIC instance, how do we grant access of OIC instance to the users list? By assigning them roles, right? And what role can I assign to a user? Service administrator, developer, invoker, monitor. Remember the session, guys, that we did few days back? Which role are we going to assign to this user?
Invoker.
I would assign service invoker role, because if I assign service invoker role, that means even if the third party tries to act smart and log into this OIC instance without username and password, within OIC instance, they would not be able to see any of these navigation options, guys. So it's like we telling them, sorry boss, we are smarter than you. Okay, please use it only for the intended purposes. Use the logins only to invoke a service, not do anything else apart from it. Okay, but even with a service invoker role, some clients are still not okay with sharing the username and password of OIC instance with a third parties. And that's when we will see how to make use of a OAuth token tomorrow to trigger the REST API. And if we use OAuth token, we don't need to share the OIC instance username and password with a third party. Okay, how does it work? We'll see in tomorrow's session. And after we see how to use an OAuth token for authentication, we would go ahead and talk about the mapping options available within OIC. Remember, we didn't cover that today. Okay, any questions, guys, on what we covered today? Perfect. Try this one out, guys. And I want everyone to practice it before tomorrow's session. And if you have any issues, let me know tomorrow.
Sure.
Thank you, guys. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Professor.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.